Hello, I'm Mark Brooks, MAPPS President. Happy GIS Day and welcome to today's MAPPS Digital Dialogue. During MAPPS conferences, our organization focuses on educating members in three specific areas: advocacy, business, and technology. Today's federal dialogue will focus on federal agency programs and the technology utilized within those programs. Throughout the day, you'll hear from experts who develop the technology, who use the technology, and who provides the geospatial products and services. I'd like to thank our sponsors for their assistance in promoting our digital dialogue events. MAPPS appreciates the time, energy, and financial support of all of our sponsors. Today's sponsors include Applanix, Atlantic, Dewberry, GeoSearch, GPI, Optimal Geo, Quantum Spatial, Regal, Sanborn, SimActive, Teledyne Optech, WGI, and Wolpert. You should have received a link to our event guidebook. Please consult the guidebook to review the full agenda, to learn more about our featured speakers, and to book a meeting with any of the groups presenting. During each presentation, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. At this time, we'll get started with today's initial presentation. Our first speakers are John Copple from Sanborn and Stefan Bailey from Prime Policy Group, who will give us a post-election legislative update. John Copple, Stefan Bailey, welcome.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Mark.
And welcome, everybody. For those of you not familiar with MAPPS Legislative Affairs, I'm the chairman of the Legislative Affairs Group. We have quite a few members of the group. They're all in different organizations, different firms that are part of MAPPS. And MAPPS has hired the Prime Policy Group, led by Stefan Bailey, to be our eyes and ears on the ground in Washington, D.C. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit about, what to expect in this post-election world. And Stefan's done quite a great job of putting together some information for us. There are also other members of the team that work together in addition to the board to set the legislative agenda for MAPPS every year. We have not only the advocacy items that we highlight and focus on, but we also have, real-time events that are occurring as Congress makes decisions and the agencies decide to do different things that MAPPS tries to react to and be part of, especially if it concerns geospatial data. So with that, I'll let Stefan introduce himself, and then we'll get on to our interactive session.
Great. Thanks, John, and thank you, Mark. And I want to thank everybody who's participating and attending this event for the opportunity to give you some insights about what's going on in Washington. Again, I'm with Prime Policy Group. I'm a managing director here. Spent nearly 25 years in Washington working first on Capitol Hill for about a decade, and since then working in the private sector, helping entities like MAPPS and others navigate the federal space, understand what's going on, understand the political implications, and the policy opportunities. And so I look forward to our presentation today and look forward to your questions. As John mentioned, there are several others of us at Prime Policy Group that work on the MAPPS team. And so we have a pretty robust and well-rounded group. So again, really thankful for the opportunity, and I look forward to our dialogue today.
Thanks, Stefan. Well, let's dive into it. All right. So with all the controversy surrounding the election, tell us what is the official decision maker on the outcome of the election? And my God, how do you see all this moving forward?
Well, great question, and there is a lot of question around this. I'm going to share a couple of slides so that we can have a dialogue here about this. If I could get it to work here. There we go. So John, to answer your question, I think it'd be important for us to just kind of do a quick review of the election and where things stand and what some of those implications are. First, the presidential race. Joe Biden is the apparent winner with a projected 306 electoral votes. Obviously, as we are aware and as is available to President Trump, there are a number of legal challenges underway, recounts underway. And so that process is going to play out over time. But I think the Biden team is preparing internally to take the helm on January 20th, while the president utilizes the tools at his disposal to ensure that, again, all the votes were counted properly and everything is on par. The Senate remains a bit of a question mark. Currently, if you look at the called races, the Republicans have 50 seats currently, with Democrats holding 48 seats. There are 2 runoffs in Georgia that are going to determine which party maintains control of the Senate next year, which obviously has huge implications on the policy agenda going forward for the next 2 years. I would suggest to you that the 2 runoffs are in the lean Republican category, but a lot can happen between now and January 5th when those runoffs will occur. So it remains to be seen, but I think the conventional wisdom is the Republicans will win at least one of those, if not both, but still an open question. In the House, the Democrats obviously are going to retain their majority. There are still a handful of races yet to be called because they are so close. But importantly, the Republicans made huge gains in the House and significantly narrowed the Democrats' majority, which will make Speaker Pelosi's ability to move legislation that much more tenuous. So it's going to be just like a narrowly divided Senate. A lot of negotiation going on between the parties, and certainly the Republicans in the House have increased their influence as a result of this election. Then interestingly, in the states, as we head into, obviously this is a census year, into reapportionment and redistricting, despite, what many of the polls said, and we could have a whole different conversation about that. The GOP held pretty much all of the competitive chambers where there was a chance that the Democrats could flip control. So the Republicans retain a very strong presence at the state level, which will begin redrawing the congressional maps that will be in place for the next decade. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of the election, obviously very high level, and we can go into greater detail and specific races in the Q&A. Let me then turn to, here are some of the key dates, and this really gets to your question about who are the decision makers and what is the process. I think the answer to that question is depending on which stage of the process we are in, there are different sets of decision makers. Ultimately, the Electoral College will vote and determine and confirm who will be the next president. So starting the day after the election until about the 14th of December, the states are counting their votes, recounting their votes, recanvassing, and they are filing certificates of ascertainment, essentially stating that the state election officials charged with making that determination of who won the particular state, they are in that process now. And a number of states have already gone through that process, and their statutory deadline for submitting the ascertainment information has come and gone. And most of those states are the kind of the states where either Trump or Biden won handily. None of the bellwether states have been up yet. Then moving down into the process, in mid-December, the state electoral college delegations meet and they vote. I may have a typo on here. It may be the December 16th. I'll double check that. But in any event, that's the date statutorily mandated by the federal government when all of the state delegation electoral voters meet in their state capitals to put their votes forward for who won the presidency. And then on the 23rd of December, those votes are then delivered to various officials here in Washington and across the states, essentially making it formal. On the 3rd of January, the next Congress will convene. The 5th of January, as you see, Georgia is going to hold its runoff elections. And then on the 6th of January, in a joint session of Congress, it will be then that Congress counts the votes and they essentially declare the election results based on the Electoral College vote. And then, of course, as everyone knows, January 20th is the date of the next presidential inauguration. So, as you can see, there are periods of time when state and local officials have the action, if you will, and are the decision makers. It will then move to the electoral voters, the Electoral College voters. It will then move to the state election officials as well, and then ultimately on to Congress, who essentially certifies what the Electoral College put forward.
So we still have to have the state certify their vote. And that's what's going on right now.
Yes, some states, as I said, have already done that, but other states, most notably Georgia, is going through a hand recount. They are still in the process of doing that, and I believe that process may wrap up as early as today. But yes, a number of states are still going through that process to ascertain what the popular vote was in their state. That will then, as it has happened traditionally, there's some gray area here, but that will then dictate to the Electoral College voters of each state how they cast their vote.
More to come. Seems like we're blazing new trails never seen before.
Yeah, it's an hourly, certainly a daily, and sometimes an hourly roller coaster. So we're tracking it very closely.
And if I remember right, the 12th Amendment kind of governs what happens if there's a blow up in this whole state electoral college result.
Yeah, and there is some gray area there as well, but certainly there are statutes and policies in place, and the Constitution speaks to this. Had there been a 269 to 269 tie in the Electoral College, that vote then would have gone to the House of Representatives, where each state delegation gets one vote. So California, with 50 plus members of the House, would have the same one vote as Alaska, right, which just has one member of Congress but one vote. And so it would depend on which party holds the a majority in the majority of states. And in that case, the Republicans retained that mantle, if you will. So, that would have caused a great deal of consternation. And then, of course, if there are issues with the Electoral College vote itself, whereby a state that was clearly won by and had been ascertained to have been won by Joe Biden or Donald Trump, but the electors of that state decide to cast their votes contrary to the will of the majority of the voters in that state, that too then would be punted over to the House, and how that process works out and what the ability and the power that the Speaker of the House has. Again, it's never really been tested, certainly not in modern U.S. history. So again, some legal gray area, but and not a lot of precedent to rely on. But it would be quite a circus, I can assure you.
Well, we're blazing new trails, that's for sure. This period of time from November 4th through the 20th has always, I think, been termed the lame duck session. What do you see as the major components taking place during the lame duck session? And do you think Congress will address the 2021 budget before it reconvenes as a new entity?
Yeah, great question. And I've got a slide here to kind of walk us through some of this. There are, and it has become custom, unfortunately, I think for many of us who want to see the government run more efficiently and want to have greater certainty, Congress often leaves some of its most difficult challenges to the lame duck session, the post election period, if you will, between now and the end of the year, and in this case, the January 20th being an important date as well. But unfortunately, a lot of the major issues have been left into this lame duck session. The things that I think are on the table, and of course there are always a bunch of cats and dogs, if you will, more minor things that are important to a few people. Those are also going to be addressed, and then will find their way into a legislative vehicle that ultimately gets enacted. But the big, most prominent efforts in this lame duck, I think, are going to be are listed here on the screen. Again, there are others, but certainly addressing the public health crisis, COVID, the pandemic, both in terms of relief and then stimulus. Obviously, for months, Republicans and Democrats have gone back and forth. Democrats and the White House have gone back and forth in negotiations on a COVID relief stimulus package. Those negotiations have not yielded any fruit. I won't even say they got close per se before the election, but they were closer than they had been, say, late summer. Some of the things that I think are going to be central to that discussion are an extension of the Paycheck Protection Program, which I believe expires, the authority for that expires at the end of this calendar year. Additional relief for state and local governments who are obviously cash strapped. There are some tax issues that were in previous COVID packages that are set to expire or need to be reworked to address the challenges we're confronting today, which are different than the challenges we were confronting in April, let's say. So that will be a major feature. I would say that there are few who give this a high chance of likelihood getting done, considering the outcome of the election and considering how far apart the two sides are. The House being, in the $2.2 trillion range. Their original bill was in the $3 trillion range, and Senate Republicans, being $1 trillion and under. So big disparities there. And then the White House is frankly all over the map in terms of, their public statements and what they want to see done. To get to your kind of second question, yes, the fiscal 21 appropriations bills or federal funding for the 21 fiscal year will be addressed. The question is, are they going to write new bills and essentially do an omnibus where they package all of them together and pass them? And so we have clear federal funding and new policy direction for the remainder of the fiscal year. Or are they going to do a continuing resolution where, let's just say, they kick it into late winter, early spring, March timeframe, which gives the new incoming administration an opportunity to get its sea legs, and then it would be up to Biden's team to negotiate that with congressional leaders. A lot will depend on what President Trump is willing to sign. I think, as we've heard, if left to their own devices, the appropriators in the House and Senate from both parties, if they were left to just negotiate this and get the deal done, they could do it, tonight. But obviously, politics plays a major role. I'm not betting the farm that they are going to get brand new, an omnibus measure through, considering some of the controversial things that are in there. But it is not. It's certainly more likely to get an omnibus than I would say a COVID package. I guess if I had to put my money on it right now, I could see a continuing resolution into early next year. I'm not predicting that, but that is certainly possible if they can't come to some agreement. here's one thing that I think is playing into this. Obviously, with the Georgia runoffs on January 5th, no one, especially Republicans in Congress, want to shut the government down, and they will not allow that to happen. Mitch McConnell will step in and figure something out. But that is playing having a significant influence over how Republicans are approaching these negotiations, because they do want to show that they can govern and do some things prior to that runoff to boost the ability of their candidates to be successful in that election. So those are some of the things playing out there. Lastly, you're going to have the National Defense Authorization Act, which will pass at some point. It will be likely a vehicle for other things to move along with it. This will be, by my count, the 60th consecutive year that the NDAA has been enacted into law, which is a streak that is held near and dear to those in Congress who work on the Armed Services Committee. So expect that to happen and to pull some things along with it. And then, of course, you're going to have executive orders and rulemakings coming out of the Trump administration as they, again, apparently are on looking to leave office, on their way out of office, trying to do some of the things in a rush fashion that address some of the priorities that they've had.
Thanks, Stefan. You're doing a great job. We're up to over 100 participants, and we're getting a few questions in, which we'll answer at the end of this little session here. We have some time reserved at the end to answer the Q&A. So anybody out there that wants to ask a question, please send it in the Q&A button. You mentioned this whole thing going on in the Georgia runoff, and with the changes in the House and Senate, how do you see policies taking shape, and how long before we have leadership in agencies such as DOI, DHS, all the cabinet level members?
Yeah, important question. I've sketched out some of what we perceive to be an incoming Biden administration's early priorities. But as I said, kind of closer to the outset, with a closely divided Senate, and even if Republicans win both of those Georgia runoffs, the breakdown will be just a 52 to 48. So if you lose just 2 Republicans on any measure, things are going to have to be very carefully negotiated. And now that the House Republicans have made the gains that they have in the most recent election, their influence is going to be strengthened, because if you lose a handful of Democrats on any measure that goes through the House, they're going to have to take into account trying to get some moderate Republican support for some of their priorities. So, not unlike where we've been in the past, things are going to have to be very carefully negotiated. Things will be very political. Even with a new administration, I think the theory, if you will, of a new president coming into office and having a honeymoon period, those days are over. And especially for somebody like Joe Biden, who's been around Washington and served at essentially the highest levels as vice president and as chairman of several Senate committees. I don't expect much of a honeymoon period for him. So things will have to be carefully negotiated. Of course, if the Republicans lose those 2 seats in Georgia, all bets are off, and things get a whole lot more dynamic and interesting. Not to suggest they won't be otherwise interesting, but that would be quite a series of events. So insofar as what we're going to see kind of a Biden team pushing early, obviously priority number 1, 2, 3 is responding to COVID, putting together a national strategy that they hope citizens will follow to address the pandemic, both from a public health standpoint and from an economic recovery standpoint, where they're going to want to push for some strong stimulus and a recovery package to get the economy back on track. Obviously, we've seen some decent economic numbers, those are in comparison to, how far the economy has fallen in the summer, and there are still millions of people out of work. So they'll be working to put those policies in place. The rub will come when traditionally, Republicans will begin to look at the debts and the deficit, and as I think all of us should be very concerned about, spending all of this money without offsetting it in any fashion. So there'll be some issues there around that. Another primary goal of the Biden administration will be around climate. One of the first things they'll do is re-enter the United States into the Paris Climate Agreement, which will be a largely symbolic effort, but certainly stake the flag, plant the flag for the U.S. and the rest of the world to understand that Biden is prioritizing this. And they'll be working on proposals to meet the climate goals that the vice president laid out in the campaign. Coupled with that will be infrastructure, and a big infrastructure push, which Biden has prioritized throughout the race, and putting $2 trillion into a host of new policies and programs. One, to put people to work, but two, to kind of reset the economy, and through that infrastructure plan, I think address some of the climate priorities that he has. And later on, John, I think we'll talk about where the industry fits very nicely into both of those priorities. Joe Biden's going to really push an international agenda and try to build alliances with allies, reset our global engagement strategies with the European Union, with China, and in the South Pacific, among other things. So, that will be a priority. And then one other thing that I found interesting is this issue of supply chains, and in this case, critical minerals. I foresee Biden kind of continuing some of the policies the Trump administration has put forward in this area of critical minerals, and making sure that the U.S. has a robust and secure supply of the critical minerals that we need to, one, address some of the climate issues that Biden wants to address, electric vehicles, charging stations, batteries for the grid. Those things all require critical minerals that aren't necessarily sourced in the United States, and to do a lot of the infrastructure stuff that we're talking about. So I can see a continuation of some of the Trump administration's efforts in this regard. And as we all know, COVID has exposed some supply chain issues here in the U.S., and I think those will be a priority for the administration. And then, of course, while they're doing all of that, they have to put their government together, right? They have to nominate cabinet officials and senior officials for confirmation. They have to fill, a ton of political positions across the government, the people that actually go out and help to execute the policies that they're putting forward. And then we'll see some reversing, nullifying, suspending of executive actions from the Trump administration, of which there are numerous examples that Biden has talked about on the campaign. To your question, and I'll close with this, sorry if I'm going on too long, but to your question about how soon will we get new agency leadership, I went back and looked at this. When Obama came in 2009, the Secretary of Interior was confirmed by the U.S. Senate and sworn in on the 21st of January, so the day after the inauguration. Ken Salazar, his first Interior Secretary, was a former senator, and so obviously had very good relationships in that body, and he sailed through. For DHS, Janet Napolitano also was confirmed by the Senate on the 21st of January. So very quickly, you saw the Senate mobilizing and activating on Obama's nominees. With respect to the Trump administration, they didn't get Ryan Zinke through the first Interior Secretary until March 1st, and there were some issues there in terms of his hearing and some background things. But it wasn't until March 1st that we saw the Interior Secretary move. But conversely, John Kelly, who was the first Secretary of DHS, was confirmed by the Senate and sworn in on the 20th of January, so the day that the president was sworn in, President Trump. So you get a bit of a mixed bag. I do expect that fairly quickly, you know, Biden will get his people through. The Senate is, again, if it's 52-48 or 51-49, you're going to have Republican senators crossing over with a willingness to support the incoming president's cabinet. So I would expect we'll have those uh, uh, nominees confirmed fairly quickly, assuming there are no kind of background check issues that come up in the hearing process.
Great. You mentioned infrastructure and climate as being priorities. You know, you're talking about a $2 trillion program.
Yeah, well, you know, that is what President-elect Biden has campaigned on. That's what he's spent a lot of time talking about on the campaign trail. And I think that, you know, his play around infrastructure, you know, dovetails very closely with his emphasis on addressing climate change and sustainability and environmental stewardship. And so his proposal, you know, has been to make major investments, not only to rehabilitate and build new roads and bridges, but also around, you know, waterways and water management, ports, upgrading the electric grid to make it, you know, more sustainable and advanced. Public transit, where, you know, they want to invest, have the federal government invest with state and local matching funds to build new public transit facilities, routes, enable people, more people across the country, not just those in the urban centers, but people across the country to be able to have access to public transit. Those things are both a infrastructure play, but also have some sustainability benefits to them. Broadband and 5G expansion nationwide, so that wherever you are, you can start a business. You can take courses online, what have you. There are too many areas in Biden's view that lack those essential ingredients to, you know, being able to fulfill a career or what have you. I've mentioned this previously, but alternative fuel and electric vehicles, making major investments there, but also in the infrastructure needed to allow those vehicles on the road. Like I believe they're talking about 500,000 or 500,000 charging stations across the country. So over that 4-year period, trying to get that set up, and on and on and on. So there are a number of kind of sub priorities within this big $2 trillion investment. The rub, John, will be, as you well know, this kind of a program has to be able to get through the United States Congress. And we will still have a 60-vote threshold in the Senate for major legislation. So there's going to need to be a lot of buy-in from both parties on the merits of this. And again, coming off a period when we have spent enormous sums on our response to COVID, and I expect we'll expend more just in addressing COVID. This will be another investment that the White House looks to make that some will look at skeptically in terms of can we afford it. Biden's view, I would argue, is that we can't afford not to do this. This will set up the United States for a period of economic growth that far outlast a Biden administration. So you'll see some competing forces there, and it will depend on Biden's ability to get these things through to Congress. Many of these things, in their totality, he cannot do by executive order. He cannot put that amount of investment into the marketplace without Congress. He cannot spend that kind of money just on his own. So that will be the major deal, is trying to get this stuff through Congress.
Well, as we look at this, I mean, obviously it's a broad list, but, you know, I would surmise that most of the people on this conference today are interested in, well, what does it mean for geospatial? I mean, where do you see our emphasis going forward with the new administration?
Sure. In my view, and we've talked about this, I believe you share it in large degree. There are extensive, numerous opportunities in the years ahead for the industry to take advantage of these initiatives. Obviously, the infrastructure piece, the data that the industry provides to the governments, be it federal, state, local, to contractors, road builders, all of those things, siting, permitting, as I've laid out here, all of those are going to be opportunities. And the more projects that there are, the more new types of projects that there are that require the data in areas that haven't had, say, public transit before or what have you. These are all going to be, I think, opportunities in the marketplace for the industry. Obviously, 3-depth plays a major role in helping interested parties decide what they're going to do, where they're going to make their investments, and things of that sort. So certainly, maintaining a very strong voice in that conversation and pushing for completion of the project as quickly as possible will be a good thing for the industry. Issues that we're well aware of that we and the industry have been working on, the Digital Coast Act, the Landslide Act. These are going to be important tools that I think we could argue to a Biden administration and others on the Hill that if you want to address certain climate or sustainability goals or other infrastructure type investment in coastal areas, for example, the Digital Coast Program, we need to get the Digital Coast Act done, but the Digital Coast Program could use additional investment, say. And I think that in a Biden world, particularly administratively, we'll have, if we make the arguments right, we'll have a receptive ear. Hydrography data, again, critical information that I know that many in the industry are involved in, related to decisions made on various levels on land development or responding to predicting natural disasters, other sustainability things. Again, these are all kind of buzzwords that I think would be well received in a Biden administration. And as I mentioned earlier, as you can tell, I'm somewhat obsessed with this critical minerals issue. But again, this is an area where I think there's going to be additional investment and focus by the Biden administration. I believe there's somewhat bipartisan support in Congress for things of this nature. So again, understanding better what we have here in the U.S. Is going to be something that is looked at and again present opportunities for the industry.
Well, the $2 trillion kind of syncs up. I know the American Society of Engineers has a $2.2 trillion 5-year figure. So, it's in that range, and I totally agree on these opportunities, and I'm certain there'll even be some additional ones coming out. We've seen some recent action on the Digital Coast Act. I mean, Mark Brooks sent a letter to the leadership with MAPPS support of the Digital Coast Act, trying to get it through. What happened? I think it was just Monday of this week, correct?
Yeah. So it's a long and if you don't, I mean, this gets into like how the sausage is made up on the Hill, and it's not always pretty, but obviously been working on this issue for a number of years, and it looked to be set up quite nicely for enactment into law, and it's still, I think, in a very good position to get that done this year. A little bit more work will be required, but the bill, the House had passed its bill, actually in a package of larger bills. The Senate had passed its standalone bill as 1069 and sent that over to the House. And language was very similar to what the House had passed. but the House still needed to act on it in order to send it to the president's desk. Well, as the House leadership was preparing the vote schedule for this week, some concerns were raised about language in the Digital Coast Act regarding fees that the USGS or DOI would collect at various conferences. And this has been kind of an on and off issue that some in Congress have complained about. And so in order for the bill not to totally implode, the House had to amend the Senate's bill slightly to address some fees issues, related issues. And so they did that. And the bill has now gone back to the Senate, where we are hopeful that they will complete action on it and move it by a voice vote or unanimous consent here in the next period of weeks, certainly before the 116th Congress is adjourned. So we'll be working on that vigorously, and I do think that Mark Brooks's letter that you referenced was helpful in terms of raising the profile of this issue with House leadership and getting it on the floor. Unfortunately, the stars didn't align to get it done fully, but we're rounding the turn, if you will.
And we recently have another letter for GIS Day, is that right?
Yeah, that's correct. Congressman Curtis from Utah is planning to introduce a resolution in the House today, honoring, recognizing November 18th, 2020 as National GIS Day. We have submitted a letter of support that Mark has signed to the congressman, applauding him and Congress for considering this resolution and taking it up. It remains to be seen exactly how the kind of legislative process will work out, but we're actively engaged in that effort. And look, it's a resolution, it's honoring GIS Day, but I think like all of the other things that we do to educate folks on the Hill, just making sure that there are opportunities that we take advantage of to put the benefits of the industry and how essential it is to daily life in front of members of Congress and staff is always a valuable use of time. And I think this GIS Day resolution does just that. It reminds them of how important it is. It puts it kind of, if you will, at the top of their inbox, so they have to give it some consideration. And hopefully that helps to build a foundation in Congress to better understand how important geospatial is and how important the industry is to the economy and to many other things and services that not only the government provides, but to people's everyday lives.
Great. We left some time for questions, and we have a few. First question is, where are we in identifying the priority on the infrastructure? And I think, I think you summarized it pretty well. I mean, it's going to be one of Biden's major initiatives coming out of the gate here, right behind COVID. So I think that,
I think the specifics will come from the standpoint of, once we know which party is going to control the Senate, once we have a better idea of some of, who Biden puts in positions of influence within his administration over this issue, we'll have a better sense of what the art of the possible is. We'll want to make sure that our priorities aren't dictated by, but match up well with the people that are going to be kind of running the show, both on the Hill and in the administration. But certainly, I think there's an opportunity in the broader infrastructure conversation to, again, educate folks about the importance of GIS, but really drilling down and putting some policy proposals on the table and ultimately getting them enacted into law or through some other regulatory means that help the administration achieve their priorities, but also help the industry in terms of opening up opportunities to to do your work.
Another question came in is, how does the electoral college delegates get selected?
That's a great question, and I believe that each party selects, and I think it may be different somewhat in each state. I don't know that it's laid out in statute, so every state may have a different different approach. But I believe the parties, nominate their folks to be electoral college voters, depending who wins, that's kind of how it comes out. Again, this all gets into who is certified and how the states certify. In some cases, the state legislature has a role in determining who the electoral college voters are. But they're not necessarily, if you will, the governor and the 2 senators and the members of Congress. They're more kind of maybe
Seems like there's state
process,
conferences.
but not elected officials.
Yeah, there's state conferences and they get nominated from those state conferences and approved under each party, I think. And then so far, we've been, MAPPS have been tracking critical minerals for quite a while. And I believe where we're at right now with critical minerals is most of that is falling under USGS as far as the mapping, the underground mapping for critical minerals. And we've seen some budgets come out of core sciences and other departments within USGS for the critical mineral mapping. And we've continued to support it on the Hill in the appropriations committees. And we'll continue to do so along with 3DEP and some of our other initiatives.
Yeah, and it's, very brief background. President Trump issued an executive order, I believe it was back in 2017, identifying critical minerals as a priority national security and economic security issue for the United States, and that then set the dominoes going in terms of actions that the federal government has taken that have involved, and as you rightly point out, a great deal of work on the part of the USGS, but also on the part of the Department of Commerce. So there are a number of places where I think this issue is taking hold and where the priorities are going to be and the policies are going to be realized. And so we have a good opportunity, I think, to explain to the incoming policymakers what value our industry provides. It should be obvious, but I think we'll have an opportunity to further educate them on that and open up potentially new avenues of opportunity and new work streams with those folks who are going to be focusing on the issue of critical minerals in a secure and robust supply.
And I know, MAPPS leadership with your help has been, and Prime Policies Group help. You have a number of people supporting us, has been having meetings, virtual meetings on the Hill, and mainly as the appropriations process has gotten started again. It appears, and my summary coming away from those meetings was that, the budgets are largely following, traditional expenditures so far. When we look at 3DEP, FEMA's budget, NRCS's budget, USGS's budget, although they're changing around a little bit, still a big initiative. Critical Minerals still has a budget. You don't see major shifts occurring in the 2021 budget, do you, in these areas, or are you seeing something new?
No, I do not. Again, the big question will be whether we get, the omnibus passed, new bills passed, or if we are going to revert back to, FY20 funding and policy through a continuing resolution. I know that I hope that, and I'm sure everybody or most of those on participating in on this in this discussion would prefer not to see a CR, especially one that runs to March, that the federal agencies then don't have perfect guidance or visibility into what they're going to be able to spend, when, what's going to happen in March. Are they going to do another CR? There's going to be additional money. So hopefully that won't happen. I don't see any major changes to the programs that we've been talking about and been focused on in this debate that we're going to be having now on 21. What I would love to see, and I think that John, you and I and Mark and we've all talked about, is to see what we can do to boost it going forward as we have Biden or a new administration coming in and some changes on the Hill in terms of leadership on committees. Boost that funding. So, we're not so much worried about, are we not going to get what we got last year, but hopefully we can get more and enough more to get these things done more quickly so that we can, do the work that's required there, but then allow these agencies to move on to their other priorities. That would also be of benefit to the industry.
We had another question coming in on the budgets. This is more at the state and local level. And I don't know what your take is on the real impact to state and local government budgets due to COVID. I mean, I know what we're reading in the media and what we're hearing. I mean, we have relationships, through MAPPS with NACO and a couple of the other organizations,
Mm-hmm.
and we're tracking their efforts to get funding in a COVID bill. I mean, do you think they're going to be significantly impacted? Or are they overreacting? Is this like yelling fire so they get some attention? And will the feds help bridge the gap, or, as part of this COVID bill?
Yeah, great question, and I do think it's a very serious concern, particularly if you're at the at the local level and you don't have the ability, like the federal government, to borrow all of this money. You are strapped to the point where you are cutting back on certain services, and I think again we've seen some improvements in the economy going forward, or as of the spring and summer. But as we go into a period potentially where there are COVID's coming back with a vengeance, if you will, I think they're going to continue to face real fiscal challenges on that level. And so ultimately, I think that yes, state and local governments will get a significant funding from the federal government in a future package. Will it be what Nancy Pelosi has requested? I think at one point it was close to $1 trillion to dole out to the states and cities and counties for various projects. I don't think so, but they will get it, and they will, it will be welcome to them, because it's at those levels that they put a lot of people to work, not just those working for the city and doing all of the essential services of the city, but certainly all of the contractors that work for the city doing other things that help to implement their projects and their policy priorities on a local level. So I expect we'll see some in a forthcoming COVID package. What that amount will be is still an open question.
But you could see some bleed over into the infrastructure bill that also brings the money to state and local government.
That is correct, and that's a great point, John. Actually, we talk about Biden's plans or so and so's plans as this $2 trillion infrastructure plan or what have you. That's not to suggest that if the opportunity arises in a COVID package, that Biden won't attempt to get a portion of that $2 trillion proposal that he has put forward done through a COVID package. right? If they meet up, if they're helping to quickly revitalize the economy, some of the elements of the broader package, he'll want to, get those things done so that they can get the economy back in working order and kind of check those priorities off their list while they still look to find an opportunity to do the rest of his infrastructure package. But I could foresee, and this was particularly apparent had the Democrats perform better kind of on some of the Senate toss-up races, and had they been projected to take the majority in the Senate, you would have seen exactly that. I think you would have seen people getting something, them trying to do some things under the rubric of a COVID recovery and relief and stimulus, and then leaving some of the other things for a more tailored infrastructure package.
Great. Well, Stefan, thank you so much for all this, and your insight, your wisdom is always helpful to guide us in going future. Just for the MAPPS membership, the LAC and Mark and our support groups and our administrative support groups are working on rolling out a web-based advocacy platform that will make getting in touch with your congressional leaders much easier, much faster. Stefan's going to be working on some standard language that we use in those advocacy efforts, and we should see that roll out in December. So all these issues that we've been talking about, you'll have the ability to interact directly with your representatives through that web-based platform, and we look forward to engaging more of the membership in these actions. And with that, back to you, Mark.